The truth is, had this so-called vigilante be a Black man, an Asian man, a Latino, would we see the same response? This quote unquote vigilante represents exactly the system that led us to where we are today. Ironically, the system that he is opposing is the very system that he represents. He represents privilege, and it is his privilege that allowed him to even have the mentality to do exactly what he did. And the point of the fact is, everything about him represents the very system that he, quote unquote, is fighting. Everything about him represents everything that is wrong with the US current healthcare system. Privilege is the problem. Privilege is the cancer of the current healthcare system. What's been going on is nothing more than fake outrage. The problem is America won't take responsibility for the decisions that America has made. America is very much equally responsible for what happens. America is very much responsible for the current healthcare system. Why? Because people don't seem to understand the power of their vote and the power of the decision makers we vote into office. Their policies is exactly what got us to where we are today, and I'm going to prove it. This is not by any stretch of the imagination a pro-socialist conversation nor an anti-capitalism conversation. This is a conversation that recognizes that both systems have strengths and both systems also have very much weaknesses. But one thing we know for sure is what America is doing currently when it comes to healthcare isn't working. And the minute we acknowledge that and stop putting our trust in these fake movements and actually do something that is strategic and powerful and a change maker, nothing is going to happen. Nothing is ever going to change. This is all going to be a moment of outrage that passes, and then everything goes right back to the way it was. If anyone thinks that an individual is responsible for the decisions of an entire corporation, then we do not understand corporate America and how corporate America works. It's a system. It is not an individual. Profit is king when it comes to corporate culture and corporate America, which means it doesn't matter what the industry, if there is a for-profit structure, then profit will always be king. And I hate to tell y'all this, regardless of what you do, of what you say, if you think cutting off the head of a corporate entity will lead to change, then you absolutely do not understand how powerful and how stable the corporate culture is. Cutting off the head will lead to the growth of a new head. And most of the time, that new head is going to double down because the corporate structure and culture will protect itself and will institute policies that make sure that the corporate structure has no vulnerability. For anyone who's worked in the corporate world, you and I both know that this social media outrage, this media outrage of all types, will not change anything because no single individual carries nor dictates a corporate culture. In fact, most CEOs do not have the power that most people think they do. Because if you understand corporate structure, you know that the minute one CEO underperforms and they have their own measures and their accountability is to their board. And the board, you will probably not see. Their shareholders are who holds them accountable. And so if they underperform, they will be removed and replaced by a new CEO who will do exactly what the shareholders and what the board wants done. The investors are the decision makers. The investors are who propels this culture of profit over everything else. So this corporate culture that we have allowed to infect the healthcare industry will only and will always prioritize profit over people. There is no middle ground. Profit will always be king. Recent events have left Americans wondering, how did we get here? Do you know how we got here when it comes to healthcare? How has the most powerful nation have such an ineffective yet costly healthcare system? This episode will build your understanding of historic benchmarks that created the current healthcare system. You will be more equipped to discuss healthcare policies and ultimately elect government officials in alignment with your values. Find out also some unique yet concerning options some Americans are exploring. We thank you guys for watching, and as always, don't forget to do what? Click subscribe. Hey you guys, so if you are someone who's really sincerely interested in figuring out how the healthcare system got to where we are today, this is exactly the information you're probably looking for. I'm going to do my best to lay out all the facts that I think you're going to need to make better decisions. If you're someone who just thinks that there is no responsibility for the average American when it comes to the current healthcare structure, then this is not the conversation for you, because I'm going to hurt some feelings. Okay. I'm going to hurt some feelings because the truth of the matter is that America doesn't seem to be able to take responsibility and accountability for the decision making that has been made.
The United States receives the worst health care of any wealthy nation on the planet. In a survey of 10 wealthy nations, the United States ranked dead last when it came to health outcomes and access to care, and second to last when it came to administrative efficiency and equity. The United States is the worst when it comes to, things like life expectancy and infant mortality and safety during pregnancy and diabetes management. If we're spending all of this money, where the hell is it going? It's going to administrative costs. The United States spends more than double the next highest wealthy nation in administrative costs. The money is going to, among other devious entities, health insurers. The health insurance industry recorded net profits, not gross, but net profits of $25 billion in 2023. In 2022, while a lot of you were rationing your insulin and your inhalers, CEOs of just 7 health insurers took home $335 million. And the health insurance industry has spent $117 million on lobbying the government to keep this system in place this year alone. To be clear, they are robbing you, and they are keeping you and the people you love the most sick and in pain to do it. The reason that they're doing this is because they believe that you are too dumb or too weak to do anything about it. And every day that we labor under this system, we prove them right. The time for Medicare for all was 80 years ago. Every other wealthy nation on this planet has figured this out. Why haven't we?
The fact of the matter is, America treats socialism as the side chick. The chick America really wants to be with, but doesn't want it to be publicly known that America wants to be with her. So she continues to live this facade that she's really married to capitalism when it comes to healthcare, but capitalism and her have this very toxic relationship. And she doesn't want to admit that there are things about socialism that she likes, which is why she treats socialism like the side chick. But she doesn't like everything about socialism, so she'll never be seen in public with the side chick called socialism.
And I think that this collective American experience, which is so twisted to have in the wealthiest nation in the world, all of that pain that people have experienced is being concentrated on this event. And it's really important that we take a step back. This is not to comment, and this is not to say that an act of violence is justified. But I think for anyone who is confused or shocked or appalled, they need to understand that people interpret and feel and experience denied claims as an act of violence against them. People go homeless over the financial devastation of a diagnosis that doesn't get addressed, or the amount that they're going to have to cover with a surprise bill and things like that. And when we kind of talk about how systems are violent in this country, in this passive way, our privatized healthcare system is like that for a huge amount of Americans. I mean, I did not have health insurance until I got elected to Congress. When I first ran for Congress, I had to sit in a free clinic.
This, if you haven't figured out yet, is not a pro-socialist conversation. This is not a pro-capitalism conversation. This is a conversation that really dissects out what we have historically shown to work and what we have historically shown to not work, what America has voted and supported, and what America has not approved, disapproved, opposed historically, which collectively explains why we are where we are now. And so we have a healthcare system that is very much a for-profit system, and for-profit system never have a humanitarian purpose. It will never have a humanitarian vision, because the goal of for-profit systems is not to cut costs, but to make profits. And the profit that it makes, it's off of our healthcare. So I'm going to talk about some of the historical points. I can't talk about everything, so you really got to do your own research if you're truly interested in figuring out how we got to where we are now. But before we get into that, just a quick note, talking about the power of your vote and the power of the things that you do. Just a reminder, please do not forget to comment, like, and share. I don't say that frivolously. I say that because it actually has power. Your comments, like, and share have power. We have, thankfully, a consistent 1 to 200 viewership. We want to grow that. So if you're joining us for the very first time and you have not subscribed, please use the power of your subscription to allow information like this to become available to others. Please do not hoard information, because that's what these corporations are doing. They're hoarding the profits, they're hoarding the wealth. That's what these top earners are doing. They're hoarding that wealth. You do not want to be like them. Do not hoard the information. We ask of you to please share this information, to please comment to become more visible. We have literally, out of our hundreds of viewers and out of our thousands of subscribers, we have one subscriber that faithfully, every single episode, comments. And what does that do? It allows us to like the comment, which changes the algorithm, right? And it allows us to pin a comment, which also changes the algorithm. So what a lot of people don't understand is, if we don't have that opportunity to do that, based on this very consistent supporter, our viewership would be even lower, significantly lower, because it doesn't meet the SEO. And for all those who know all the jargon I'm talking about, you know what you know. So that being said, I just want to remind everyone, as we will be talking about using the power of your voice through your vote and your coins, here's a very simple opportunity for you to learn how to use your power in the choice of subscribing, and your power in liking, your power in commenting. And commenting can be as simple as thumbs up. You don't even have to say much of anything. Believe me, there are folks out there who are spending their time giving us a thumbs down. Okay, so if you really think this information has value, then we ask of you, give us not just a thumbs up. And there's a handful of you who have been faithfully doing that. We thank each and every one of you. Please use the power of your subscription. Please use the power of your thumbs up. Please use the power of commenting. It allows us to engage, and then that allows us to become more visible. So please, 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 we don't know how else to say this. One, we thank you for all those who have been faithfully following and subscribing, but we ask you to take that additional step to make sure that this information is more visible, as we're entering an age in which people are concerned about access to unbiased information. People are concerned about not being able to get valid information, or information from resources that actually did an effort to research something. Folks are out here making comments, but never even try to research anything. We're actually doing the research. We're actually making sure that we fact check ourselves. And if you fact check us, we don't have a problem with that. Just mention whatever your fact check or correction is in the comments. We don't have a problem with that at all. If you are sharing false information, especially intentionally, we will correct that because we want to make sure that our viewers have access to accurate information that can be verifiable by not one, but multiple resources. And that's what we do in preparation of these topics that are so vital to our community. So that being said, thank you for allowing me to get on my soapbox for a little bit. But let's really get into the matter of it all, the situation of it all.
Do you have an actual plan at this point for healthcare?
Yes, we have concepts of a plan that would be better.
Still just concepts? Do you have a fully developed plan?
Let me explain.
You have to know the past to understand the present. As Kamala Harris's mom might say, we didn't just fall out of a coconut tree into 2024. There's a long history that led us to this point. And if you don't know that history, you can be easily duped or manipulated, often willingly, by people who pretend to be on your side. George Santayana warned a century ago, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
So I'm not going to go into the details of what happened recently because I think it's dark, I think it's tragic, and I think it speaks to the errors of our system and where we are today. And the fact that people are so pro this vigilante really says a lot. You know, people are thinking that they're doing something great for humanity, but I question those people who are like, who are claiming him to be some hero, to really look at the details of the matter, right? To really look at the complete details of the situation and the context of what's going on in America currently. So you have a wealthy white male who is upset with the healthcare system. I'm not saying he doesn't have a right to be upset. Please don't misunderstand what we are saying. I'm not saying that he doesn't have a right to have a voice in the healthcare system, but he took it an extra step. And he took it to a step in which someone has been tragically lost for their families, et cetera, et cetera. And people are hailing that this person, and there are lots of things coming out. So I'm not at all glorifying the person either. I'm not glorifying either side. I'm saying, why don't we look at the situation and look at the symbolism of what's going on? So the other individual who represents corporate America, I mean, people are saying he represents the healthcare system, but understand the healthcare system is corporate America. So he represents corporate America. And as much as you may not like the fact that that's the case, it is the case because many things have happened in this country that has led us to have a healthcare system that's so for profit. It mirrors the toxic aspect of corporate America. And yet still people are hopeful that somehow the system is going to do good. But when has capitalism ever prioritized the individual? It never has. Name me one incident in the United States. Matter of fact, let's go further than that. Name me one incident in the entire world in which capitalism has prioritized the individual. I will wait. Make sure you hit us up before the end of this video, okay? And I'm going to tell you it's never happened. It's never, ever happened, which is why the whole nonprofit world was necessary. I'm not going to go into the birth and the origin of the nonprofit world, but I do want you to compare the structures and why one system has worked and hasn't worked. Okay, you know what? Let's get down to the facts. Let's figure out what has been working. Let's first talk about the countries who have gotten it right. The countries in which there are healthcare systems that are actually working. According to world population, the countries that have the top healthcare systems include Taiwan, South Korea, Australia, Canada, Sweden, Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, Norway, and Israel. So let's talk about why. So when they assessed the top healthcare systems, they looked at overall quality of the healthcare system, the healthcare infrastructure, the healthcare professionals, and the quality of medicine that's provided and the government's readiness. As we all reminisce about the pandemic, we understand that government readiness is crucial. Let's see, at least for the top countries, let's say for the top, let's say for the top 5 countries, let's look at what their overall healthcare system is like so we have a better understanding as to what may actually be working, what we have already proven internationally to work. So Taiwan, you're up. Taiwan is number 1 currently. Why? So Taiwan has a national health insurance system that came about since 1995. So as a single payer national health insurance system, that's their structure. The government is the administrator of that system. Then you have in South Korea also has a national health insurance system, but their system is not free. Australia has what's considered to be a hybrid system, but it does primarily have a public health insurance. And then you have Canada that has a public health insurance that came about as a result of the Canada Health Act of 1984, which provided publicly funded health insurance that is Medicare. And also of note, Australia's health insurance is also Medicare. However, Canada does also have private insurance available. And then you have Sweden, which has uniquely a decentralized system. So this system is operated by regions or provinces, and is a public health insurance. It's not run by the national government. It's ran by local provinces or local governments, and it is a public health insurance system. And their insurance system is tax-based. So it's supported by revenue acquired through taxes. So basically, when you look at the top healthcare systems in the world, the countries that have the better healthcare system also seem to consistently have a public health option or primarily a public health insurance. Now, keep in mind, we're going to hit the Affordable Care Act in a little bit, but just a reminder to people, the original proposal and policy of the Affordable Care Act included a public option, and that got eliminated. So understand how we got where we are now. So one of the things a lot of these countries who have national health insurance have consistently supported is the belief that healthcare is a human right. And a lot of their policies are based on the logic that healthcare is a human right. And so when you have the belief, if your foundational belief is that healthcare is a human right, it is hard to reconcile making that foundation within the system or within a system that works for profit. Does that make sense? Like, if you just look at the very foundational belief system, how could a system that truly believes that healthcare is a human right also place that healthcare system into a for-profit system? Do we see how the two doesn't seem to work cohesively? A human right cannot be for-profit. It is a very basic understanding of logic.
So here's the state of American healthcare today. I'm a cardiologist, and a patient was referred to me for a cardiology procedure because, well, they need the procedure. Now, before we can schedule it, we have to get approval from the insurance company, which often requires a prior authorization. So for that, we submit all the information to the insurance company and await their decision whether it's approved. Of course, as it frequently happens, it was not approved, and they're requesting more information. So we submit more data. Several days later, they come back and say, nope, still not approved. So they are requiring a peer-to-peer, which means that I get on a phone call with a doctor who's employed by the insurance company. So then we have to schedule the peer-to-peer. So my staff gets on the phone, day 1, day 2, day 3, an hour plus on hold each time until they finally get through. And then they schedule a phone call, which is scheduled at the end of the week. They give you the time, and I got to carve out time in my schedule in the middle of the day so I can speak to this doctor. Mind you, this process is now taking almost 2 weeks. And at the end of the day, it's probably still going to be denied.
One of the things I do also want to bring to your attention is that America has tried several times to have a national health insurance. And I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, once again, I'm not saying that a socialized structure is the answer, because they too have their issues when it comes to how healthcare providers feel about socialism. I'll talk about that in a little bit. equitable access. So, for example, Canada has issues with inequity when it comes to healthcare. There are concerns about the wait time to see professionals. So, socialized structure has its issues as well. But it does seem to be some type of public health option seems to be the winner when it comes to quality healthcare, as far as we have historically shown internationally. Um, and there are states that have attempted to make their own attempts at creating some type of public health system, because they believe, or are based on the belief system that is a human right to have access to healthcare. Even if you don't buy into the philosophy of healthcare being a human right, if you actually buy into the actual business of that, you would understand that the lack of universal healthcare, or the lack of a public option or public insurance, leads to an increase in utilization of the healthcare system. So overutilization is very much historically linked to a higher number of uninsured. This was the whole logic of the Affordable Care Act. The higher the uninsured, the more likely you'll have overutilization through utilization of the emergency room instead of chronic care management, which is far more expensive, higher rates of hospitalizations, because you're not preventing diseases and you're not controlling conditions. So you're more likely to have higher rates of hospitalizations. And that leads to a very costly healthcare system. So even from the financial perspective, having a public access actually helps to control healthcare costs, which is why the system is so expensive. The coverage is not the cause of the cost of healthcare. It is the inefficient utilization of the healthcare system. And how do you do that? You maximize chronic control, you screen for chronic diseases, you intervene and try to decrease end organ injury and end outcomes from chronic diseases. That's how you control the cost. And it's the cost of the healthcare system that has led to why it's one of the top reasons why people go bankrupt, one of the top reasons why people have to work extra hours overtime, one of the top reasons why hospitals can't sustain a sustainable budget to be viable and have to close. One of the top reasons why we have healthcare deserts, it is the cost of healthcare, the cost of dealing and caring for individuals who have end organ issues. So the treatment of cervical cancer is way more expensive than the pap smear and the colposcopy for those who have abnormal pap smears. You get what I'm saying? The hospitalization for heart disease is way more expensive than diagnosing and screening someone for hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes, and controlling those diseases so that they don't have to be hospitalized and have a cath or have to be managed for an acute heart attack or stroke. And all the sequelae that comes with that, the rehab that comes with that, the medications that come with that, the higher surveillance that come with that. You get what I'm putting down? I hope y'all are picking it up. But let's go back to what I was saying about the states. So there are states that are actually getting it right. There are states that are doing well when it comes to healthcare. So who are they? It's graduation time. So Hawaii has a great healthcare system, and this is according to the U.S. News and World Report. It's Hawaii, then it's Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and then California. Okay, so what are some of them doing that they got right? Well, I'm going to point out two. So Hawaii in 1974 passed the Hawaii Prepaid Health Care Act, which required employers who have individuals who are working for them for 20 or more hours to cover their health insurance. And then in 1989, they then added the state health funding to cover those who fell into an insurance gap or healthcare insurance gap. So that's one of the notable things that Hawaii has done. that likely has made a difference in terms of why Hawaii has such great healthcare. And then when you look at Massachusetts, so what has Massachusetts done? That's number two. Notably, in 2006, Massachusetts passed legislation that made it possible for almost every resident in the state to receive healthcare. So the Massachusetts system is one of shared responsibility, so employee, employer, state, in order to make sure that every individual who's a resident in the state has access to healthcare. So that's what Massachusetts has done. Now, these are notable legislations, and these are the two top states. So they likely have figured something out. Y'all are seeing the consistency in what leads to success, right? So now you know how to vote and how to listen to those who you're voting for to see what is their logic, what is their philosophy, what is their sociology when it comes to healthcare. It's so critically important. So I'm going to highlight some important presidencies, right? So presidencies matter. And who is the president and who is in Congress also matters when it comes to the healthcare structure, because the United States has tried several times to have a public health option. So when you are looking at healthcare and healthcare reform in the United States, it's really important to look at the economic environment at the time. So notice, you know, when major healthcare changes happened, it happened in conjunction to what was going on economically. And so in order to put certain things into context, you have to also put into context what was going on political, economically, and socially in the country at the time, because that is often the driver of why people voted the way they did. So for example, in 1939, you have physicians starting to organize the first Blue Shield plans to cover the cost of physician care. Why? Because people were coming out of dire times. This was the very end of what? The Great Depression. So the Great Depression from 1929 to 1939. In 1939, this was one of the things that happened. A second landmark legislation was the formation of the Department of Health and Human Services, also at the end of the Great Depression. So people were looking for ways to be able to afford healthcare. And this is what really propelled the formation of these structures, the first Blue Shield plan, as well as Department of Health and Human Services. One of the most notable presidents when it comes to the proposal for a national healthcare plan is Harry S. Truman. He's the 33rd president of the United States. He was Democratic. And I'm going to highlight parties only also so that we can keep in mind what was happening to the party at the time that a lot of these legislations happened. Because keep in mind, from the late 1800s into the early 1900s, there was a switching of or gradual transitioning in the philosophy and the policies of what was the Democratic Party, which then became now the Republican Party, and what was the Republican Party in terms of logic and perspective on government involvement in our daily lives, then became what is modern day Democrats. And so you also have to keep into consideration when you're looking at these policies, which party we're talking about, and was this pre or post the switch? Because there was a switch that happened. So if you look at the Southern Democrats and the way they voted before the 1980s, they voted consistently with what we would consider to be the policies of the current Republican Party, because they are who became our current modern day Republicans. So one of the also important things to understand is the perspective of different organizations. So don't assume that a certain organization necessarily has a certain position.
$12 and change for a patient's allergy injection. And they had done an audit and said that they weren't going to cover that bill of $12 and change. I am a doctor, and I have no idea why they're able to deny this.
Does anyone else feel like they're having everything denied and need to appeal lately? I mean, I'm talking about joint replacements for a patient with bone-on-bone arthritis needing to get appealed for no reason. Like, what do we do? How can we make this end? I just feel like I'm in this cycle, spending more time dealing with insurance companies than with patients.
Insurance is the largest roadblock to just attaining proper treatment, access to healthcare. And it's just like we're just bleeding money left and right in this healthcare industry. And who is it benefiting? Not benefiting me as a doctor. It's not benefiting the patient. Who is it actually benefiting?
So, for example, Harry S. Truman's proposal for the National Healthcare Plan was voted against. Americans voted against it, and it was not passed. It got defeated in Congress. One of the most instrumental voices at that time that was opposing and has consistently opposed a national health insurance or a national healthcare plan has been the AMA, the American Medical Association. The American Medical Association has, in fact, at times labeled such policies as being socialized medicine. Now, I'm not going to get into why the American Medical Association feels that way, because that's a whole separate conversation. Perhaps I'll do that separately. For example, Reagan, if you look at Reagan's presidency, one of the key driving force behind his election or the journey to his election was actually the American Medical Association that I believe put out an ad even before his campaigning, predated his campaigning with an ad, and you can check the dating on that, that kind of flagged anything that sounded like national insurance plan as socialized medicine. Now, some would argue, and Reagan himself did argue, that socialized medicine would be harmful to physicians. And he stood on that logic, and he hammered down on that logic by saying that if you have socialized medicine, then physicians won't have choices as to where we would practice, won't have choices as to what our income would be, and ultimately won't have choices as to what education we would pursue. And so he argued that socialized medicine would then lead to physicians being socialized and ultimately would be the start of this whole economy becoming socialized. So and I'm going to tap into Reagan. Reagan was very much instrumental, and Reaganomics and Reaganism was very much instrumental in where we are now when it comes to healthcare.
20 years later, in 1965, it was Democrat Lyndon Johnson who signed the law creating Medicare for seniors, while Republicans, aligned with the American Medical Association and the healthcare industry, condemned the idea as socialism.
This was simply an excuse to bring about what they wanted all the time: socialized medicine.
30 years later, in 1994, Democrats Bill and Hillary Clinton tried to provide universal health care coverage, but Republicans once again aligned with the healthcare industry to block it. Nearly 2 decades later, in 2010, when President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, not a single Republican voted in favor of the law. In 2022, when President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which cut the price of insulin for seniors and finally allowed Medicare to negotiate for cheaper drug prices, every single Republican in Congress voted against it. And finally, in 2024, when the Biden-Harris administration announced that it would remove medical debt from credit reports, the incoming Trump administration responded by promising to abolish, or delete, as Elon Musk says, the agency that created the policy.
I know people don't want to hear that. Like I said, I'm going to hurt some feelings with these facts. But the truth of the matter is, he was very much key in what happened and how we became such a very much for-profit structure when it comes to healthcare. So you may ask, how did that happen? Well, let's talk about it. So let's talk about the Reagan years, because the Reagan years, like I said, are very instrumental. And granted, there are other presidents that made other landmark legislation like Clinton, and we'll talk about a little bit about that later, and Obama clearly when we talk about the Affordable Care Act and the expansion of maternal and infant services under George Bush. So we'll talk about, and we'll touch on a few of those, but really I want to talk about the critical presidency that really became the catalyst to the healthcare structure that we have now. If you were to ask a lot of economists and social sciences, they will say Reagan was probably one of the most instrumental presidencies. So Reagan's second term, to give some perspective, between he basically had an easy win. After recovery from the deep recession, it helped him in his second run for president. So he went up against a former vice president, Walter Mondale. And of note, Walter Mondale's VP was Geraldine Ferraro. So the first time that a major party had a female on the presidency ticket. Um, so that is notably as to what happened, even though Walter Mondale lost tremendously, and it was basically a red wave. It is important to note that his running for the presidency was notable because of him putting Geraldine Ferraro on his ticket as the vice president candidate at the time. So one of the things that Reagan did very well, and to those who don't really know or aren't familiar with Reagan's presidency, prior to becoming president, he was governor of California. Prior to that, he was an actor. And that's going to come into play when I talk about the union and his view and policies with regards to unions. So one of the things that he did very well was selling this logic of, there was two major philosophies, and I'll talk about trickle down economics in a little bit. But one of his primary philosophy was that anything that looked, he did support to a certain extent Social Security, but anything else that really looked similar or seemed to represent some aspect of socialized medicine, such as a national insurance, he labeled as being socialism. And that worked so well that even to this day, people, when they hear the word socialism, think it's some kind of boogeyman. And are unable to listen to any aspect of it that may actually benefit their own health, because Americans are inherently terrified of anything that looks like socialism, even if it's a hybrid structure. Even if it has been proven over and over to work, even if the current system is making people bankrupt, unhealthy, dying, it doesn't seem to matter. Like this whole philosophy of socialism and it's of socialized medicine and this false equivalency during the Cold War that was going on at the time, the suggestion that anyone that advocated for universal healthcare is somehow the equivalent of a socialist, of somehow the equivalent of a communist, worked magic. Because to this day, that propaganda and that marketing continues to penetrate the thoughts of Americans to this day. And so anything that even remotely sounds or look like it is the boogeyman to most Americans, even if it's a policy that would actually help their own health. At the time of his second election, this marketing and propaganda worked extremely well to the point where there was a massive red wave. Reagan winning 49 out of 50 states, Mondale only winning the District of Columbia. That's how powerful that statement was. Reagan even convinced people that if they did not push back against Medicare, that one of these great days, you and I are going to spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in America when men were free. This was post-slavery. Okay? When men were free, this was post-slavery, post-Jim Crow, but definitely not post-everybody free. So Reagan's perspective on freedom was a little bit off. A little bit off. But needless to say, this positioning that he had worked tremendously while people were blindsided by the things he was actually doing. So Reagan actually slashed the budget of the Department of Health and Human Services by 25%. He also reduced the funding for Medicaid by 18% and reduced the funding for child and maternal health by 18%. As a result of his policies, over 600,000 people lost Medicaid. So over 600,000 people lost insurance. At the same time, He proposed and passed tax cuts and reduced the tax brackets that benefited the rich. The top earners reduced their tax obligation from 70% to 28%, reducing corporate tax rates from 50% to almost nothing. And his logic was the trickle down economics, believing that if you benefit the top earners, that somehow it will trickle down to the poor of America and everyone will do well. Except there was one problem. Top earners have a hoarding problem when it comes to wealth. He also seemed to go against his very foundational own individual philosophy. So, as I mentioned, he was an actor. And as such, he was a member of the Screen Actors Guild. Well, a lot of people believe that he would be a for-union president because of his history, right? Except he did the absolute opposite. So he leveraged his his presidency campaign with the Air Traffic Controllers Union. And when they went on strike, he threatened them and that severed their relationship. And as a result of his presidency, there was a shift away from unions, from union support. He was not ended up not being a president that was very pro-union, but actually had very anti-union policies. Before he came into presidency, General Motors was the top employer in the United States. At the end of his presidency, Walmart became the top employer in the United States. So it went from a union-based company to a for-profit company as a result of his policies. So there was a decline in unions under his presidency. He was known as the great deregulator because he ended the nonprofit requirements for insurance companies and hospitals, leading to the growth of managed care. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we got to where we are now. Because a lot more insurance companies and hospitals became for profit as a result of his presidency and his deregulation of the industry. And as a result of his overall economics called Reaganomics, it led to an increase of wealth in the top earners and a widening of the wealth gap, leading to inequities when it comes to income and decreased economic mobility. And decades later, we are still reeling from the impact of his policies. And each president subsequent to him has had some type of policy that tried to correct or undo some of the negative impact that Reaganomics has had on the country, whether it is from the HIPAA Act, where people, when they think of HIPAA, they think of privacy laws. But one of the very key instrumental things that the HIPAA regulation has done under the Clinton presidency in 1996 is that it restricted the use of pre-existing conditions in health insurance coverage determinations. So it tried to tamper a little bit um, some of the effects of this deregulation from Reagan's presidency years, in which insurance companies were now in this free market system where his goal was to increase competition, but ultimately what it did was cause the American public to suffer when it comes to healthcare, with a downturn on the quality of healthcare, the inability to get insurance, leading to high cost of insurance companies, especially for those who had pre-existing conditions. And so Clinton tried to temper some of these just tragic outcomes or costly outcomes by introducing the HIPAA Act, which included this attempt to regulate insurance companies. And as years progress, as many of you may be more familiar with, we ended up with the Affordable Care Act. And as some of you are aware, as we came out of the Great Recession, the Affordable Care Act was passed. And actually, the full name is the Patient Protection and Affordable Act. So it's actually PPACA and not just ACA, but whatever. We've truncated it. So some of the things that it has done is that it expanded the eligibility for Medicaid. And as I mentioned in a prior video, which you definitely should check out, Medicaid has, not all of the states have chosen to expand Medicaid coverage. And there is no surprise that some of those states are also the states with the worst healthcare outcomes. So definitely check out that video where I talk about that in a little bit more detail. It also established a marketplace where individuals can purchase healthcare insurance with the use of tax subsidies. So these tax subsidies help to increase access to insurance, and also in very unique ways, the PPAC also supported innovation in healthcare delivery. So it boosted the innovation of healthcare and ability to be more competitive on an international level, which are some of the things that people don't oftentimes pay attention to. Other things that the PPAC did was that employers were not mandated to provide health benefits. Instead, large businesses whose employees receive insurance subsidies will pay penalties. Small businesses were able to have access to more plans through a separate exchange. Healthcare plans were also not allowed to deny anyone coverage for any reason, including their health status, nor charge them more, which is what they were doing, based on someone's health or based on someone's gender. And one of the most important things that really led to a tremendous reduction in the uninsured group is the young adults. So young adults were able to continue under their parents' plan for up until the age of 26. And so it has been cited that that particular clause of the PPAC, the Patient Protection Affordable Care Plan, in which young adults were able to continue under their parents' plan until the age of 26, was cited to be one of the primary reasons why there was a tremendous decrease in the younger or non-elderly uninsured population from 48.2 million in 2010 to 44.3 million in 2013. However, of note, despite that initial significant reduction in the rate of the uninsured, in 2017 to 2019, there was an increase again in the uninsured population up to 32.8 million, which was an increase of 4.6 million since 2016. I'm going to let you do your homework to find out who was president during 2017 to 2019. That being said, I just want to make sure that we're doing our homework. And before we jump on the vigilante bandwagon, really dissect what is going on and assess what's going on when it comes to healthcare. Do your homework. It doesn't take a lot to get some basic information and understanding what are the policies of our representatives, of the people we elect to Congress, of the people we elect to the presidency. What is their policy when it comes to healthcare, and looking at the numbers and making sure that the agencies that are responsible for the numbers are able to work independently so that the data is truthful and accurate, or as accurate as we can possibly be, because data will never be 100% accurate just by multitude of natural occurring errors. But we want the purest data possible so we can really assess if their policies are actually effective, if their policies are doing what we hired them to do, because we are hiring them to work for us as the American public. So as much as we're anti this and we're anti that, we really should be assessing, does our policy, our philosophy, our position when it comes to healthcare, does it actually work? Is there data to show that this structure actually works? So that we know that when we vote for someone, we vote for a policy, we vote for a representative, that we're voting for a person or a policy, a person that represents the policy that actually positively impact our own health and ability to afford healthcare. What some people are starting to do, you may ask, people have been reactive when it comes to healthcare, and now they're looking for healthcare in other countries.
Flew to Turkey for a full body checkup for $600. The package included round trip transportation to and from the airport, and when I tell you I felt like a celebrity, they picked us up in a custom Maybach with a TV and drink fridge. We stayed at the Ritz-Carlton because we were feeling fancy, but there are so many nice hotels that are literally only $50 in safe areas. The next morning we arrived at the hospital, which literally looks like a hotel. They have every single doctor you can think of, including gyno, radiologist, cardiologist, dentist, ophthalmologist, so much more. We met with our translator for the day, who explained all of the procedures that we'd be getting done. You guys, when I tell you they tested us for everything, I'm talking urine, stool, blood tests, STDs, vitamin levels, hormone levels. They even took an ultrasound of my liver, my thyroid. I then went to the dentist and the eye doctor and then the gyno. And no, I'm not pregnant, but she did show me pictures of the inside of my uterus, which was really cool. Afterwards, we went to lunch, which was complimentary, amazing, healthy Turkish food. Right after lunch, we went to every doctor with our translator and they discussed my test results and also had an action plan. Overall, I feel amazing knowing my health status. It was a beautiful trip. Turkey in itself is so much fun. I felt so safe. 1,000,000% would do it again.
Now, while I understand the frustration that leads to such a decision making, I do want to caution people in doing so. Because one, you have to ask yourself, what is the incentive for other countries to provide for Americans to come to their country to receive a full body scan, a multitude of lab work? Is there an incentive for the country behind that? And oftentimes you want to ask yourself, does this even work? Part of what we do when it comes to preventive medicine in the United States, granted, there is room for significant improvement in our system. I'm not defending the current system. I'm just highlighting some of the logic that will help you to make better decisions. And so when you see these appealing, when you see these appealing packages where you get to stay in fancy hotels and they rub your feet and you have free dinners and free lunches and they take you to this facility where they do a myriad of tests, you see all these healthcare professionals and you're paying for this. What is the benefit of that to you? And the reason why I bring that out is one, preventive medicine is covered by healthcare plans in the United States. So preventive medicine it has not been the issue. It is the more active treatment of chronic diseases that has been the issue in the US. But that being said, the policies when it comes to preventive medicine are scientifically evaluated. They're not just flippantly determined and guidelines are set. No, there are organizations that look at a tremendous amount of scientific data. They test the quality of the data and the quality of and the ability and feasibility to actually implement what has been found in these research studies to our population. Is it financially feasible? Is it even logistically feasible? For example, you can't say we're going to scan every person's liver if you don't have enough radiologists to actually manage that volume of ultrasounds. You see the logic. You can't say I'm going to implement, a pancreatic scan to decrease the rate of pancreatic cancer if no scientific literature has actually proven that doing these expensive scans actually decrease the prevalence of pancreatic cancer. You see what I'm saying? So the logic in how these guidelines have come about are through assessing the feasibility, the ability to generalize it to the population, and is it going to target a significant portion of the population? Because if a certain condition only affects a small percentage of the population, that may not necessarily be beneficial to the entire population at large. So you screen instead of the whole population for sickle cell, you screen the populations that are more likely to have a positive result, because that is what financial efficacy comes in this capitalistic society that we live in. This is the system that we have chosen to be our primary system. So you have to understand how the scientists and policymakers are having to navigate these systems in order to provide for us a healthcare system that actually works. And another caution, when you look at countries that are providing these travel packages, these healthcare travel packages, understand that they may be preying on health anxiety. And there's a certain percentage of our population that has anxiety disorders, and health anxiety is a very real thing where they want to be screened for everything because they are anxious about outcomes because of what they've heard, what they've experienced from family members, from friends, or witnessed or had in the past, right? And so there is the possibility that they may be preying on individuals so that they can gain this income, right? And then you want to look at the consistency, right? So I've talked about what is the gain for the country. I've talked about, does it even work? Doing these elaborate screening tests is the country actually, is anyone monitoring the data? Is anyone determining that doing these expansive testing actually has an impact on what people are hopeful to it having an impact on? So if you're hoping that going to another country and having a full body scan is somehow going to relate to you fighting or preventing cancer, no one's proven that. So you may be spending money and feeling and feeding your anxiety, but not or feeding your frustration, your righteous frustration with the current healthcare system, but not actually making the impact that you desire to have. And then finally, I'm going to say, look at the relationship of the country with its current citizens and the relationship with America. What do you think the greatest commodity is in this current age? So, and some of you may say the greatest commodity is gold. That's a reasonable answer. But no, some of you may say the greatest commodity right now is cash. And that's understandable. Cash flow does matter, right? In our individual lives and as businesses. But I would argue no. I would argue that currently the greatest commodity that has required extreme investments in security, cyber security specifically, because data is currently the greatest commodity. And the reason why I'm highlighting that is to understand that these countries are able to provide these services for low cost, appealing, luring, low cost, because what you don't realize is that the data they are collecting on you, honey child, sugar lemon tea, your data is worth way more in gold than your weight. They are collecting data which can then be leveraged against your country. Understand that that is where we are. And so if the country doesn't have a great relationship with the United States, guess what? You're giving them a leverage out of your frustration, out of your anxiety. You're giving them leverage and power against your own society. The other way you can tell whether this is sincere is if they're not top on the list for healthcare, why are they providing you free healthcare? If they're not listed on the top of the list of the top countries with healthcare systems, it tells you that they're not providing great healthcare for their own citizens. Why should you believe that they're providing you great healthcare? Just some food for thought. I'm going to end here. I can go on and on and on and on about this. But as you guys can see, the key message here is to do your homework. Don't jump on the bandwagon. Don't be reactive when things happen. Be intentional about your decision making. Be intentional about your research. Be intentional about what policies you support. What is your own philosophy when it comes to healthcare? We've touched on this a little bit on a prior episode when we talked about private equity. We'll link that episode because we talked about some of these philosophies on that episode. But basically, our goal is not to sway you into socialism or capitalism, one or the other, because they both have their issues. Our goal is for you to have the information you need to understand that maybe one or the other is not the solution. Maybe a hybrid is the solution. I don't know. It's up to you to make that decision for you and your family. And as always, this is Dr. T, the hand behind the handle of Healthy Bump Club right here on YouTube and healthybump.club on Instagram. And don't forget to check us out on where? Fanbase, because we support our own. We are intentional about where we present our information. And as we mentioned earlier in this conversation, please do not forget to comment, like, and share. Okay? Don't forget to comment, like, and share, because that is how you use your power. We thank you guys, and we hope to see you guys when? The next episode.